All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Gym Goss with myself, Jacob Schepis, Sam Schepis, and the people punching peacock, Jackson Peos. And we're here today with Chris Barakat. Chris, welcome, man. How you doing?
Doing well, man. Thank you guys for having me. And it's nice to officially meet or
Indeed,
virtually
indeed.
meet, I
Yeah,
guess.
virtually for now, hopefully in the flesh sometime in the future.
For
So,
sure.
Chris, for listeners who may not be familiar with you and your work, give us a little bit of a background and introduction to who you are and what you do.
Sure. So super quick, brief overview. Long story short, I coach full time. I research kind of full time, part time. I teach part time at the University of Tampa, where I also research. Um, and I am a natural pro bodybuilder with the WNBF. Been competing for a little over 10 years. Started in 2011 when I was 19. I just recently turned 30. So, in the grand scheme of things, even though it's been a decade plus, I still think I'm extremely young in the research space and the fitness space and the competitive space. But yeah, I primarily research exercise science, everything related to hypertrophy. So it is a blessing that I get to work in a lab where I get to run research studies on things I'm actually interested in. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Awesome, man. And your experience obviously extends beyond just the science. You're a pretty accomplished bodybuilder, and that's what we're going to talk to you about today. Some of,
Thanks.
I guess, the things that you do as a researcher that have helped shape the way you apply training and nutrition interventions in practice with your coaching and obviously your own contest prep endeavors. So firstly, I want to discuss the paper you were an author on last year, which was peak week recommendations for bodybuilders and evidence-based approach. And that was also with Scott Stevenson, was Escalante was the lead author, Scott Stevenson, Alan Aragon, and Brad Schoenfeld. And that paper has certainly done the rounds. So tell us a little bit about what you found to be interesting in the findings of that paper that was maybe in line with what you'd already been doing in practice, or maybe something that you hadn't been doing as much of, or didn't think was as important? Was there anything that really stood out to you from that paper that changed the way you do things?
Sure. Yeah. So, in with that paper, the thing that was pretty cool is when we first started collaborating with one another, we all briefly just shared how we generally approach peak week and why, what we do with ourselves, what we do with our clients, what was our own theoretical rationale behind doing X, Y, and Z. And me, Guillermo, I mean, basically all of us, we all took very similar approaches. We obviously had the same objective goals from a physiological standpoint. For example, all right, we want to refill muscle glycogen, maximize that, so on and so forth. So a lot of our approaches were pretty similar. I would say I learned quite a bit from Scott and made some changes to my peaking approach based on some of Scott's theoretical logic, and then I was able to apply that to myself, apply that to some clients, and I kind of liked how that came about. Um, I'll go into more detail in a bit about that, but also throughout the peak weeks this entire year, using myself as an example, whatever was originally planned on paper was always adjusted based on how I was actually responding. So even though we have like general recommendations and like a mock peak week and general guidelines in that review paper, I wasn't able to apply that to the T based on how I saw myself responding and what I actually needed at the time. So I'll provide a bit more detail in a bit, but yeah, that's a quick little overview.
Yeah, awesome. So I've got a feeling that we'll have similar, I guess, trains of thought, or at least things that might have been done differently. So I'm really curious to hear what were the things that after you finalized the paper, changed your approach slightly.
Sure. So some of the biggest changes with me is I generally carb loaded the most on Thursday and Friday. So I'd usually do like 2 day refeeds, um, 2 days out from the show and 1 day out from the show, and then step on stage on a Saturday. Um, based on some of Scott's suggestions and kind of some of the things we outlined in the paper, for the first time, I started my carb load 3 days out, and Wednesday and Thursday was supposed to be the most aggressive carb loading days. And then Friday was a little bit more of a taper and a pullback, both in regards to carbohydrate intake and water intake. But I wasn't able to do that to the magnitude and extent I planned on doing while I was actually peaking. So even though this year I was extremely aggressive on Wednesday and Thursday with my carb loads, Friday came around and I still felt like I wasn't spilled. I felt extremely, extremely full, but I still haven't reached that spilled point. So I was like, there's still more room to push. And if I pull back now, I'm just going to wake up flat. And that's not what I wanted. So basically every Friday, I had to keep my carbs higher than predicted and higher than expected or planned. But I still loved how I peaked. And I feel like I honestly nailed my peaks this year. I was very, very pleased with it. And then one other change was, for the first time, I was a little bit more aggressive with my fat load. So past years, when I would carbohydrate deplete earlier on the week, to get rid of those glycogen stores and, hope for a super compensation effect with the load, I would have fats pretty darn high, but not nearly as high as I did this year. So that fat loading aspect was kind of a new approach that was implemented.
Yeah, awesome. So to take a step back, let's just outline for some of the listeners who may not be as familiar with peak week and our objective with the peak week. Your paper outlined 3 primary objectives when we're trying to peak. And do you want to cover that for listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So the primary goal is going to be maximizing muscle cell volume. So that's going to be via muscle glycogen, carbohydrates, potentially intramuscular triglycerides from your fats, and then also intracellular water. So kind of making sure all of that is there to maximize cell volume and size. You also want to minimize any sort of GI discomfort, any sort of bloating, and hopefully maybe enhance or decrease the subcutaneous layer and some of that extracellular fluid. So those are kind of the 3 primary objectives.
Awesome. So with the fat load, outline how that sort of changed your approach this year and what that looked like.
Yeah. So for example, in the past, on my carbohydrate depletion days, it would be a relatively high fat day, extremely low carb day from just fibrous vegetable sources, no starchy sources or no fruit or sugar sources on those days. And then, pretty high protein per usual. But to give some context and actual numbers, those macros in the past might have been 80 grams of fat, 50 grams of carb, 200 grams of protein. The suggestions in the calculations to kind of maximize intramuscular triglycerides is 2 grams of fat per kilogram of body weight. So this year I went as high as 140 grams of fat, and that's quite an increase compared to 80. So the overall calorie intake was higher, and that calorie intake increase came from increasing fat. So that was really, really interesting. It actually made the depletion phase quite easy. And I felt really good the entire peak week. There wasn't a period of peak week where I was really dragging ass.
That's very interesting. Jackson, what's your experience with fat loading? Is that something that you've trialed before? Based on our discussions and obviously collaborating on the book, I know that you are very much an advocate for high carb intakes, generally speaking. So what's your thoughts on the fat load?
Yeah, so I haven't really played around too much with higher fat intakes early on in the peak week. When I am manipulating fats, generally it's happening show day or one day out in the PM meals. And that's probably with a different objective to what Chris is going for, in the sense that I'm just looking for an acute increase in blood triglycerides to increase that blood volume, which is slightly different to increasing the intramuscular stores of triglycerides. So I do definitely notice that incorporating the higher fats in very close proximity to the show does definitely help with, at least from the pump aspect, that acute effect. But the playing with fat sort of earlier on, like in the 3 days out from the show, that's something, I'll be honest, relatively new to me, and it's something I haven't trialed or experimented with to that. So it's definitely something that interests me. Yeah, but yeah, with me, the higher fat stuff, I generally with my bodybuilders tend to isolate it to like the show day meals or the last couple of meals one day out.
Interesting. And Samuel, talk to us about your peak week this year. So Chris, or last year, sorry, geez, time has flown. Chris,
Yeah,
what
okay.
month did you compete in last year? It was around August, September, wasn't it?
Yeah, I competed September, October, November.
September, October,
Wow.
November. So
And
yeah,
you're only
cool. So
2 kilos or like 5 pounds above stage weight.
Yeah, I'm 5 pounds above my best look, and I'm
Right.
8 pounds above my lowest low, like depleted
Yeah.
flat low.
yeah, yeah. And how are you feeling?
I feel fine. I feel
Yeah.
good.
Have you had any blood work done?
I haven't. I ordered labs, and I have like the script for it. I just haven't gotten them drawn yet. Yeah, I feel good. The only reason I was hesitant to get labs drawn was because I wanted to just get back into my normal rhythm and my normal groove and kind of see where I'm at there. But like honestly speaking, I have no fatigue or diet issues from prep at the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, everything's good, man.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
very good to hear. You never want to hear people struggling post show.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
I
not something you would wish upon your worst enemy.
I think everybody struggles post show to an extent, but the more years you do this and the more seasons that go by, you definitely know how to deal with it much better. And it gets way easier. Like this prep was easier in certain ways, and then the post show was way easier in certain ways as well.
Yeah, that's what you want. That's the goal, man. So Samuel, talk to us about your peak week. In terms of how that played out. Was it your calories, macros set in place, and that's what you followed, or was it adjusted as you went? And talk about the overall approach for your peak in terms of macro stuff.
So in the first show, which was November, so early November. The first show, we kind of ran a trial in terms of it wasn't necessarily the big show that we were like kind of aiming for. So it was more an opportunity to test out a peaking protocol and see how I looked. So for that one, it was pretty low, pushing through in the start of the week. So I think the first comp was on a Sunday.
Yes.
The first comp was on a Sunday. So I had high days on the Friday and Saturday with like 500 grams of carbs, and it was like 180 protein and fats like 30 or something like that from memory. And then the following week I competed again. No, incorrect. I then had a week off and then 2 competitions back to back. And so in the week off, fats were down, like we pushed again, fats got down to like 10 to 15 grams a day just to push, create as much of a deficit as we could. That was actually quite reasonable, like to manage for like, 10 days of dieting. And then for the next peak, the second comp, we didn't push as high for the refeed, and there wasn't as much, just because the final comp on December 5th was the main one that we were looking for, trying to obviously have the best look for that. But the final peak, I ended up having, was around 600 carbs, but we adjusted on the, like, as we went. So it's like Martin and I would catch up. He would basically assess my physique and, make a decision whether or not there was room to push more carbs or we we're going to call it. So basically we just had a plan to have food available as needed, and then we were just keeping in regular contact throughout, say you know, the 48 hours pre-comp to make sure that everything was looking the way we wanted it to.
Awesome. And
does that answer that question?
It does answer that question. So
Nice.
very much in line with yes, what the paper recommends, which is doing a trial peak week, you know, before your main shows. You guys advocate doing that, or the findings advocate doing that 2 to 4 weeks out from a show, as well as, you know, that higher carb intake, you know, around 48 hours before the show as well. But you guys cover some pretty interesting stuff in that paper, such as obviously like protein, carbs, fats, but also fiber and FODMAPs. And I think that's a really interesting one that probably hasn't got a lot of attention. I think people are aware of it more so in the bodybuilding community, but I don't think first-time competitors or new coaches are necessarily as aware of the role of fiber and, you know, FODMAPs, especially in a peak week. And usually they don't have to worry about it too much because most of the time athletes are eating the same foods, or they're eating quote unquote clean, and they've been eating those foods for a while. So they're able to tolerate and digest those foods pretty well. But talk to us about that. What were the findings in regards to fiber and FODMAPs?
Yeah, again, so I think it's important that, you know, we make it really clear that the research on this topic is super limited. So the review paper was extremely based on theory and logic. So unfortunately, we don't have plenty of case studies during peak week or any randomized control trials. But some of the things that we did discuss in regards to fiber and FODMAPs were kind of making those points you just mentioned, you know, making sure that you're not experimenting with new food sources you never had before. Considering that if fiber intake is too high, you're probably going to draw too much water within that GI, and that can, you know, increase the risk of bloating or increase extracellular fluid and water retention. So just kind of being cognitive of that. But what I personally do is I do keep a low amount of fiber in, even while I'm carb loading. I've seen some people, when they get into their carb load, they'll just eat their starchy carbs or sugary carbs or whatever it may be, and they completely eliminate vegetable intake or fiber sources. I personally keep it in, but I just keep it really low. So just as a quick example, let's just say I had 6 meals during my carb load, and each meal was at around 100 grams of carbs. I would probably get, you know, 5 to 8 grams of fiber from a vegetable source per meal. So my fiber intake for that day can still be around that 30-gram mark. And I personally prefer that just to ensure that I do have a really good bowel movement the day of. I would be more concerned if there was a disruption with bowel regularity and I didn't have a bowel movement, potentially because fiber was way too low. So I think that's something you just got to experiment with as an individual or with your client, and kind of get an idea of, all right, how much fiber does this person generally consume on a daily basis throughout their entire prep? And then while you're peaking, you probably don't want to go way higher than that, but you also don't want to like completely eliminate fiber and then run the risk of being, you know, potentially constipated, especially after eating so much food. So just something to consider. The cool thing is, even though we don't have a lot of data on peak week, I did run a case study on one of my peak weeks here in Florida. It was actually one of the reasons I did a show here in Florida with the NPC with an untested org, was just so I could collect data in the lab every single morning throughout the entire peak week, and have it be an actual show, not doing a mock. So the data on that is super cool, and I'm really excited to, you know, finish that publication and get it out there, because there are some novel findings there that haven't really been observed or ever measured before. So I'm excited about that.
You're muted, Jacob.
Oh, man. That's very cool. And speaking on the topic of bowel movements, I really do worry about Jackson at times, given the amount of food that he puts down in a single sitting. Now, I get concerned for his bowel health on a regular basis. So, Jackson, when it comes to obviously managing bowel movement, what are your tips and tricks for people who are in a peak week? Because obviously it's different when you're in a peak week, but in general, let's just take this out of bodybuilding a little bit. In general, what are your tips and tricks?
Before I talk about the peak week stuff, we'll talk about the current situation with the.
How many times a day do you pass another?
That's where I was trying to get to. So generally, I train, my first session is at 8 a.m. And at the moment, I'm going twice before
8 a.m. My God.
So that gives you some context of the toilet situation at the moment. And you'll notice that I've been chipping away at my breakfast meal still, which I actually started about 90 minutes ago. So you can sort of get a general gauge of where I'm at with my appetite and on this food level. But,
lucky you guys have the hoses in Bali. Otherwise, it'd be running out of trees.
Oh man, it'd be a paper shortage in my house. Anyway, getting on to the important stuff. So following on from Chris, the peak week and the reduction in fiber approach, or as it's called, the low residue diet, while it's relatively new, I guess, in bodybuilding circles, it's been used for a long, long time in combat sport, fighters and combat sports, as a means to reduce non-tissue weight in the lead up to the weigh-in. And it's been used very effectively for a long period of time. So I am definitely an advocate of reducing fiber during peak week. I probably do reduce it a little bit more than Chris does. So to give some practical advice, generally heading into peak week, my fiber intake for bodybuilders is going to reduce somewhat in the range of 75 to 50% from where it was at standard contest prep numbers. Now, obviously, that does increase the risk of reducing your frequency of bowel movements further, which are already going to be substantially reduced just as a byproduct of you consuming less food at that point. Now, my sort of backup plan, which I've never really had an issue with to date, is if there are problems when they are waking up in the morning of show day and they can't pass, generally I'll just give them a pretty high load of black coffee early in the morning before the first meal. And to date, that has been a means to be able to get them on the toilet and pass something. So touch wood, I haven't had a problem with reducing fiber really low in the peak week, and it certainly does give the benefits of having that really like sucked down midsection, I find, like noticeable difference from like a week out to show day. And the clients feel really good. They feel way more like shredded. Like they'll often report like feeling empty, like in their stomach. And I think that's a really good sensation to have when you're going up on stage, like empty through the stomach and the midsection. So yeah, the black coffee trick is sort of the one that I've been using as like the fallback plan if we just can't get a movement on that morning.
Yeah, to follow up on that real quick, Jackson, something that I do utilize that's not mentioned in the paper, depending on the situation, I actually like using the herbal senna tea the night before, because that can really kind of just ensure that show day morning they're going to have that empty feeling, and it kind of improves their confidence. Just like psychologically, it's like, yo, my midsection looks super tight. I'm ready to crush this shit. And that's always a good way to send off a client into prejudging, is having them feel good, have a tighter waist than they ever had. So I think that's pretty important to mention.
Absolutely. And I think one other consideration with a lot of competitors, now everyone's obviously different athlete. You do have people who compete in bodybuilding who may not necessarily come from an athletic background, and they might be at on their last legs, come peak week, in terms of the hunger, the fatigue, all that kind of stuff. Samuel, I know that, you were going to do whatever was thrown at you to get on stage, but you were reporting during those days of lower fiber, how difficult it was with the drop in food volume and how hunger had picked up and you just didn't feel like you did prior to having more fiber, in terms of just like satiety and overall like energy. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's just when you do have those high carbs, I think it's like an interesting like situation. Like for my entire prep, I don't feel like I was ever hungry because I was able to manage food volume quite well with vegetables and stuff like that. You can keep yourself quite full even on low calories. And it's like when you, I was never like, I need to eat more food. I just like was like, yeah. But when you get to the peak and you have, all of a sudden all these calories and it's high carb and you are making small adjustments to food options, it's like I experienced even though the calories were higher, it's this weird sensation of, I know I have more food coming in, but it's less total food because we've shifted the weight and food selection to be more in favor of carbohydrates. Fiber is down. My fiber wasn't even that low. Mine would have been maybe 20 to 30 grams as well. But it is quite hard to, go for or get fiber really high, carbohydrates really, really high without bringing fiber in. Particularly, it's like, Chris mentioned not really making too many dietary changes. It's like the last thing you want to be doing in peak week, in my opinion, is changing food sources. So it's kind of like, I was reverting back to foods that I hadn't eaten for a few weeks to try and get carbs in. And then I found there was definitely more of a lack of satiety after eating, really high carbs than compared to when I was able to eat, salad, like more salad and veg and stuff. And that's, I imagine that's largely psychological, because if you sit down with a massive salad or on the side of your plate, it's you see how much food that is. And then if you sit down with potato, rice and some chicken, it's well, it doesn't seem like as much, even though the calories are way higher. Jackson, you had something to say or to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say that what you touched on there, I think it ties in nicely to when people report feeling ravenous or super hungry after refeed days. Physiologically, we don't really have a mechanism to explain why hunger would be higher after consuming more carbohydrates and calories like that. But I think more so what it is that adjustment in food source selection. So for example, if they're only on 150 grams of carbohydrates for their day, they're probably allocating a lot of that towards oatmeal, vegetables, things like that. And then all of a sudden they've got 500 grams of carbs to play with, and it starts going to sort of very higher energy dense source of carbohydrates. Perhaps more sugars are coming in and things like that. So while we could be in the range of 400 to 500% higher carbohydrates for the day, the overall food volume could actually be less. Which I think is why some people do report feeling sort of oh, my hunger was just crazy on these refeed days. And of course, the palatability issue possibly comes into it as well. But I think the fiber and the food volume also plays a big part.
I agree with you, Jackson. And I also think, sorry, Samuel, I also think one other element of that is traditionally, you guys, I'm sure will agree, peak week for a lot of competitors is a very exciting week, right? And there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of change. And when food starts to get changed in the way that it does, they're not blocking out their diet or trying to ignore and not think about food and avoid food cues and stuff like that in the same way, because they're excited for the diet. They're getting more food. The end is near. They almost lower some of their inhibitions somewhat, around that stuff. They start buying chocolates for show day when they wouldn't even go down that aisle.
That's the rookie move.
Previously. So they start increasing food focus as well. They start playing a little bit more macro Tetris. They've got
I definitely think That's
that
what
can
it
definitely
is.
have some psychological effects in terms of hunger or perception of hunger. It's not, it may not necessarily be physical hunger per se. It could be psychological, or contributing in some way as well, I think.
I definitely second that. I think that when you, it's like, just thinking of my experience, it's like I got to the end. Now, having competed before, having coached athletes through comps and stuff, I was very wary of not hoarding food and doing things like that, not walking down aisle. People always like are asking, as you get closer to the date, they're saying, oh, you know, what are you going to eat? What are you going to eat? And it's like, you do get close to that point where it's like, okay, you know, Martin might go, or your coach might say, after your comp, like, you know, I want you to have a meal out or whatever. Now it's like, I don't feel like I was particularly food centric, but it becomes more of a factor because now you're getting close to dealing with those hurdles. But in terms of the actual peak week and the high carb days themselves, you do have to become more food centric because, you know, it's like I explained, and Chris also mentioned, it's like if we're trying to manage fiber intake, you're trying to change macros, and it's like for so long you get into this like kind of cruise control where it's like you don't have to think, you don't have to put a lot of thought to it. It's like, you know, whatever tracking app or software you're using, it's probably like just copy and paste day to day to day, and meals are regular, meals are the same. It's like you don't have to think about it. Now you're playing macro Tetris, you're changing food sources, you're trying to do all of these things, you're planning for the peak, and you know, maybe, you know, you need to plan a dinner out because, you know, there's multiple people going and you can't just fly by the seat of your pants. You need to buy those foods to have them available on the day, you know, your honey or your rice, lollies, whatever it might be. And all of a sudden, all of these things are happening at once. So I think for me, it was probably needing to worry about what food to eat. Whereas like I was more than happy for the entirety of my prep just to like just eat whatever was in the fridge and not think about it. And it's like it was vegetables or salad. And then you have to start being a little bit more strategic about the actual meal composition.
Tying into our previous discussion on like gut residue and low fiber and FODMAP foods, my last peak week, or my second last peak week, I think it was States, but this was 2013. This is a while ago.
2013, not 1913, was it?
Not 1913, 2013. Hey, I'm the same age as Chris, so if you're knocking my age, you're knocking Chris as well. We
just the last time you competed.
Yeah. So during my peak week, I did the whole, hey, flexible dieting thing. You know, the year before I did a comp and it was clean eating. But this season was like, I had an ice cream every single night, you know, a skinny cow. Remember those things? Skinny cows. I had a skinny cow because I'm like, this is living. I'm getting shredded. I'm eating ice cream. Like, how cool is this? And no one was really doing it. So it was, yeah, pretty cool. And in my peak week, I went to one of those like American cereal stores here in Melbourne, and I stocked up on like 6 different cereals. Like I've got my 48-hour carb refeed basically. And I just went to town, and I looked like I would have only had like 250 grams of carbs each day. Yeah, not a lot, but holy shit, my midsection, there's photos, like I spilled out like an absolute motherfucker. And I was like, what happened? And I didn't know. And because I was self-coached, I was doing it all on my own. I was like lost. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, you know, do I bring my carbs down? I really didn't have the understanding about, you know, all this stuff, which is why your paper is so important for coaches, you know, going into the sport now, because they can at least have some awareness of, you know, these things being important. Because I just had no idea that the foods I ate would affect my, you know, gut mass. And then 2 weeks later, I competed in nationals, and fortunately, I figured it out. And I was like, okay, this is just because I ate that thing did it, right? And that's like, maybe that stuff is, you know, bad fattening food, you know, who knows? And I ate, you know, the same food the whole way through, and I looked 10 times better. And that was just a really, important lesson for me about, one, just being like too gung-ho with changing food sources, but two, you know, how your gut mass can play a role. And, you know, there was also that psychological element. I remember because I was doing my own macros and I was a young kid, like I was like 21, right? I didn't really have anyone telling me how to do this thing. And I'd never tracked macros until my prep. I was like, I probably have like an extra 10 grams of carbs, like, you know,
Yeah.
because I was shredded. I'd been dieting for so long. I'm like, surely 10 grams, you know, it's going to make me look fuller. Like, do I go up this much? And as soon as I started eating all the, you know, American, it was like Captain Crunch and shit. Like, as soon as I started eating, I'm like, yeah, I could probably fill out a bit more and have another bottle. Like, it was bad. It was bad. So interesting stuff there.
I have a similar story, and I see that happen a lot with competitors where they mix up. So if they're overly flexible and they're mixing up their food source and they're trying to fit something in that's really pleasurable, but they haven't had for a while, they can have a negative look, especially in the midsection, and then they confuse it with being spilled over, even though they're nowhere near actually being full from a glycogen standpoint.
Right.
But it's like, yeah, what do you do at that point? You don't want to eat more because your midsection's thrown off, but you're still kind of flat, and it's just a terrible, terrible position to be in. In 2013, it looks like you and I competed in the same year when we were both young kids. I did something similar. I nailed my peak perfectly through Friday night. And then Saturday morning, I was like, yo, I remember Alberto Nunez said he was eating muffins before his NPC show. And he just kind of rolled out of bed and just did this local NPC show and crushed it. And he had like blueberry muffins for breakfast. So I nailed my peak week until Friday night. And then Saturday morning, show day morning, I started eating a bunch of food sources I haven't had in 12, 16 weeks. And as silly as that sounds, you know, like I wasn't even gluten-free, like intentionally, but like throughout the diet, I kind of was gluten-free. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And then I started eating all these things that I haven't had in so long. I started having blueberry muffins and whatnot. And I looked way more watery in like a 3-hour time span. I was like, this is not what I woke up looking like. But yeah, it's interesting to see that. And again, if you're just taking like,
have you spoken to Alberto about this and like told him how much he screwed you over?
I might have. I don't know. I've seen him a lot in person, so I probably have called him out about that already.
The problem is he was probably eating blueberry muffins all prep.
All prep, yeah.
Exactly.
And he's Berto, like he was probably eating 600 carbs all prep.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a bit different.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of people kind of messed it up with the food source thing. And I also think a lot of people, generally speaking, I think a lot of competitors go into shows relatively flat or far from being like truly full. So I think a lot of people, because you're dieting for so long and you are in a deficit for so long, there's almost this fear of food, or there's almost this misunderstanding in regards to how much you could actually handle. So while you're dieting, I think it's really important to if you're not going to do a mock peak week, no problem, but at least have a couple of refeeds where you truly push it and you try to understand subjectively what feeling full feels like. Because I think there is a very unique sensation that being like super compensated feels like. The skin does feel tight. You feel like your muscle is like heavier and hanging off of your bone, and it really should feel different. So I think it's interesting. I want to ask you guys, how much of a percentage point do you think peak week can make if it's nailed? Because I feel like a lot of people in the evidence-based space, they underplay peak week, and they start telling people like, oh, just don't do anything. If you look great in the gym, just keep doing what you're doing. You look good. But I think there's a lot to be gained if you nail it. And it's one of those things where in person, you can really tell. In like
to be hard.
Super high quality video, yeah, if it's like, you know, insanely, like if the video is so crisp but it's like you're in person, then you can tell. But photos can be hard to actually capture how the physique's improving. So I kind of want to get your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, my thoughts are that it matters more and has a larger effect the leaner somebody is.
For sure.
Period. So a lot of these athletes who are, you know, looking good and they're, you know, maybe going to be competitive on stage, but they could definitely die with another, you know, couple of months of dieting. At peak weeks, like, it's not going to change the look a hell of a lot. So I think, yeah, for those athletes, even if they just dieted through to the stage, they'll look fine. But when you're in true contest shape, it's like you're flat as a tack. Like you can't get a pump, like just, doing some push-ups and with some bands. Like you have to have some carbohydrate, and, be quite topped up in terms of your glycogen stores to even be able to, look impressive at that point. Like, you all know full well how unimpressive a natural physique looks, when somebody's strung out and they've been on, low calories for months on end and they're depleted as all hell. That's when I think peak week done well can have a pretty large effect. Percentage wise, I would say maybe up to, around 7 to maybe 10%, depending on how much you nail. And that would be for someone, again, who is in true stage condition, and is pretty flat, going into their show. But I think if someone's reversed into their show, for example, Brian Miner, for example, I know that he reversed, spent, I think it was 8 weeks reversing his calories up. So he didn't really need a peak as much because he was already topping up glycogen stores for weeks. He was already tapering step count down. He didn't have to rely on a peak to improve the look as much. But for the competitors who are dieting into the show, and it's a pretty much a sort of sprint to the finish line, and they do end up in a place where they're pretty depleted, and flat, stringy 7 days before the show, and they're in shape, can have a pretty big effect. Jackson, what do you think?
Yeah, so one of my biggest gripes about the evidence-based community is this, I guess, this perspective that so many things don't matter. That has been the last few years.
Very blasé. It's very blasé.
Meal timing doesn't matter. Food sources don't matter. Blah 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 blah. So many things don't matter. I'm I just can't get behind that approach. And the better you are, like you said, Jacob, the more that these things are going to matter, and the more serious you are. Yeah, the more the 1%ers, if you are a good athlete, that can be the difference between, I think, a first and a third place. Now, sort of taking a step to the side, I don't know how much you guys follow the IFBB, but there were a number of examples that stick out in my mind of where peak weeks were either done really well or were just done really bad. Now, let's make the caveat that these guys do have a few more moving parts than the natural circuit, but still, a lot of the principles still remain the same. Now, we look at guys like Regan Grimes going from the Olympia, where he looked pretty soft and pretty flat, and then to a few weeks later competing in Egypt, completely different look, won the show, and it was just in a couple of weeks difference. And you look at Nathan Biasha, who won a show, looked hard as nails and crazy, and then a few weeks later fell down to fourth when he was the favorite. This is just stuff that's happening in peak week. So I think that the manipulation of the variables in that 7 days before the show is far more important than a lot of people like to believe. So I'm definitely someone who likes to pay very specific attention to the minor details, because I do think that it can matter to the competitive outcome.
It's you would nearly say that the peak week is 50% of it, because the reality is it's yeah, you diet for a really long time, but you can absolutely butcher a prep in that final week. You could take someone out of placing completely if a peak isn't done well, right? It's you could, it's Chris mentioned before, it was a couple of blueberry muffins and all of a sudden he's ruined his look. It's peak week matters just as much as the entire prep, because that is the final lead up to competition. It's you're trying to put on finishing touches. It's Jacob said, up to 10%, and it's yeah, you can. No, it's
that was 10% benefit.
Yeah, that was definitely.
And I think you can have an up to 50% negative effect on the look.
That's how I was initially thinking. I was 5% of the prep, and then it's well, hold on a second. It's you could improve the way you look by a little bit, but you could absolutely ruin it. And you could, like Jackson mentioned as well, it's you can, and I've experienced that with athletes where it's one competition, they don't even place, they don't look good. like relative to some of the other people. And then all of a sudden you manipulate like timing a little bit, or it's like the peak changes and they have a completely different look, and all of a sudden they're a podium finisher. So the peak week is obviously very important and can't be underplayed. And I think the attitude of, if you look good, just run with it. Maybe you haven't pushed as hard throughout the diet. And it's like, if you don't feel like you can make any improvements through, a peak week. I don't know. I feel like most competitors, particularly in like bodybuilding and physique, I guess, like you said, Jacob, the leaner you get, the more improvements you stand to make in that peak week.
As you guys, it's pretty like simple, to me anyway, like makes so much sense. Like you have 3 objectives in a peak week, as you guys stated in your paper, right? It's like you have maximizing muscle glycogen, minimizing subcutaneous water, and minimizing abdominal bloating, right? It's like those things contribute to whether or not you're going to improve your look. Because if you've got bloating, if you've been eating a very high volume diet over the course of the prep and you're bloating, if you're very flat and you've been eating low carbs, well, there's 2 out of those 3 variables that are going to contribute to how you present your physique on stage that the peak can essentially fix. You can fix in 7 days. You can top up max glycogen stores, quite significantly, and you can reduce bloating quite significantly as well. And same goes for subcutaneous water. It's like if any one of those 3 things is affecting your look because you've had to make certain decisions in your diet to get lean, right? Stage lean, such as eat low carbs or eat high volume foods and so on and so forth. They're the 2 primary ones for most athletes in a peak week. You are going to need to adjust something before your show in the peak in order to look good on stage. Now, if you haven't had to do any of those things and you don't have any bloating because you're maybe someone who doesn't get a lot of hunger and you've got a pretty thrifty metabolism, you can just keep eating a regular diet, you haven't got any bloating, and you're an Alberto Nunez who doesn't have to eat on super low carbs, but you might not need to make as drastic a change, but you're still going to respond and benefit from topping up glycogen stores if you've been dieting and lost weight. You can still be tighter through the midsection if you're able to reduce fiber further and still void. It's like, I think there is always room for improvement, but I think the main thing that people don't realize is that if they get it wrong, it can have a huge effect. And that is understated, I think, as Jackson was saying. I also think, Jackson, to the point of, I agree, the evidence-based community is saying, it doesn't matter, right? When they say those things, they talk about them in isolation, and it seems to make sense because they're talking about one thing in isolation. But if you add up everything that the evidence-based community, for example, says doesn't matter, then nothing matters. And what's the fucking point, right? It's like protein timing doesn't matter, just your total intake. Okay, that's fine. Well, the food you eat doesn't matter, just, equate your total calories and energy balance. Okay, well, then all of a sudden you keep doing that for everything. Meal timing, meal frequency, then nothing matters. And it's just like,
so this is the
nothing
movement of
operational
2022.
about that advice. But that's the issue. There is nothing operational with that advice. It doesn't actually tell anyone what to do.
Yeah.
And it tells us, cool, maybe it doesn't matter as much. We don't need to stress out about it as much. But we still depend, because the fitness industry is a pendulum. The evidence-based community is like on the same pendulum. It's going to swing this way, nothing matters, and then it swings this way. You've got John Ivey, nutrient timing, and then all of a sudden you've got, nutrient timing doesn't matter at all. And the answer always lies in the middle. And I think we forget with peak week, especially, like, the answer does lie in the middle, and it's going to be context dependent. It's always going to depend on the individual and where they're coming in, the place that they're in going into the peak week. But I think at the end of the day, it can have a pretty modest benefit if you're somebody who is, ticking all the boxes and you're in shape. But it can also really screw up your look. So it does matter for both of those reasons. You can improve, and you could also look way worse. So you pay attention regardless.
One other thing, like, that I was thinking of just then, is that it's like we're only talking about nutrition, peak week nutrition. It's like we haven't even considered the other components of peak week that are also really important, like training, managing overall stress and fatigue. Like, even that is like massively important in terms of that final look. And again, something that potentially could make or break a physique. If the right amount of care and attention isn't placed towards these things, a lot of people just be like, oh yeah, just train a little bit less. So it's like, oh, but you also, can't just like stop training for a week, right? You have to be doing something. You got to be managing, how much fatigue you're carrying. It's like managing steps. It's like all of these things. Again, we say it doesn't matter, right? Like whether you get 10,000 steps a day or not, it doesn't really matter. It's like provided you again have to be doing something. I think all of these, things in isolation need to be managed very closely to truly maximize your outcomes on, in those final days or in a peak. And that's also why, we like advocate to doing, trial peaks and to test those protocols to ultimately see how people do look. But yeah, there's a lot of moving parts.
A lot of moving parts. And I've seen competitors, for example, just on the activity side of things, especially, in divisions where there isn't as much emphasis on muscle mass, such as, a lot of the female categories, bikini, fitness, so on and so forth. I've seen a lot of those competitors in the past coming into peak week, they're feeling a little bit, heavy, or they might just be freaking out. They might feel like they've got more weight to lose than they actually do. They panic, they stress, and they go do a heap of cardio, right? Even though you've told them what cardio they need to do and how many steps they need to do, and their steps jack up, and all of a sudden they're just retaining more fluid, or there's, some edema and things like that, and it changes the look. And then you've got to course correct and try to take measures to obviously rectify that. But, I've seen that happen before. I've seen, people do stupid things in their training, or start dialing back training, too early because they just take the foot off the gas. They think, oh, I'm there now, and, they can start to ease up, and that has an effect on the look as well. One thing I wanted to talk about, Chris, on the recommendations from the paper, it was to basically stop all training from, was it 3 days out from memory, and just do light posing only. Now, that was a little bit of a new recommendation to me, not something that I've done traditionally. I taper training and whatnot, but it's a very sort of light pump sessions, and stopping maybe, 36 hours out from the show generally, at least something like that. So 3 days out was somewhat novel idea to me, but I can definitely see the rationale there. Do you do that with your clients? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I personally do really light sessions, really short, really light sessions, generally circuits. Sometimes I don't even have to go to the gym. I can have a resistance band and do some calisthenics. And
like what you would do when you're pumping up for a show.
Kind of, yeah. And just have a little bit of posing. I think a lot of competitors, what I see happen is, all right, they're trying a carb load, and they go into the gym and they do a normal 90-minute training session, 2 days out or 1 day out, at a relatively high intensity. And they kind of forget that for you to actually store muscle glycogen, you need to be in a surplus and not burning those carbs that you're eating just to fuel the training. It's like if you're training really hard, doing pretty darn high volume, you'll be surprised how much freaking food you can handle. And again, I think a lot of people just step on stage flat, the training before the days of the show, probably a little bit too much volume. And on top of that, you kind of mentioned the day of the show, maybe their step count's really high. You're kind of walking to tanning, you're walking to a polygraph, you're walking to check-ins, you're walking around the hotel venue, you're kind of finding where you're going, whatever it may be. You can easily double your step count just walking around the freaking venue and trying to get everything done, or you're going grocery shopping and you're up and down 30 aisles. So I see a lot of people kind of, again, just burn through the carbs they're eating, and they're probably not storing it, and potentially coming up flat. And then just to backtrack real quick, everything you guys mentioned about some of the general things we're seeing with the evidence-based community saying nothing matters drives me absolutely freaking crazy. And I think one of the biggest reasons for that is because people are getting too hung up on statistical significance within a randomized control trial rather than practical significance. So something in the exercise science field that we need to realize is a lot of these studies are underpowered, and the duration of the studies are super short. So regardless of what variable we're looking at, we really need to give these results, like take it with a grain of salt rather than just like taking it as being the holy grail. I remember when I was way younger, you know, in 2013, 2014, before I got into grad school, if a study came out and another expert in the industry was saying this is better than that, I took it at face value and like believed that expert was giving me scientifically proven information. I didn't understand how to critically analyze a study, how to actually look at the design, how to actually look at the results. Okay, what stats did they run? How much power do they even have to make these claims? And it's interesting, if you take a data set and you give it to 7 different research groups, you might get 7 different conclusions from the same data set, you know? So long story short, I used to value science even more, or inappropriately value science, before I had experience in the actual field. So there's just a huge difference between statistical significance in study and an actual practical significance with what we do. I know Jackson wants to chime in.
Yeah, so I've had very, very similar experience to you, Chris, and I'd say that we're probably in the same boat. Like when I was coming up and I was putting out content and things like that, I was very like pro PubMed, you know, and like if I saw something come out, like that was it, you know, and I was guilty of saying like a lot of things don't matter, and I was that fully flexible dieter who gave very little credence to meal timing, meal frequency, food source selection, things like that. And because I was like, well, the study showed it's not too important. But geez, when in these last couple of years, when I started to be a little bit more critical of the science, because I understood what it actually, like you said, the statistical things that go on behind the curtains, and just how much statistical nuance can affect the conclusions that are coming in these findings. I started to still use science to frame my positions, but I also paid a hell of a lot more attention to experience too, and sort of what the successful guys were doing and what sort of clues that they were leaving. And in the last couple of years of my training, and like Jacob will be able to vouch for this, like when I actually did start being a little bit more anal with those things, geez, progress got a hell of a lot better very, very quickly. And it's like, okay, hang on a minute, maybe like this sort of stuff does matter. And like Jacob said, maybe one thing in isolation, maybe that's not going to be the difference, but all those things stacked up together can be super, super powerful. Now, I just wanted to make one more point, because I have a study that's actually in review at the moment, and it looks at a fat loss cream, or supposed fat loss cream, transdermal. Now, talking about statistical nuance and the impact that this can have on the findings of a study. So you will know, Chris, and Jake will probably know as well, that when you're running a statistical analysis, you look at the distribution of the data. Is it normally distributed or not? And whether it is normally distributed or not can impact the statistical test that you then use to look for effects. Now, to determine the threshold to determine if the data was normally distributed or not is 0.05. Now, if it's less than that, you say that the data is not normally distributed, and then you have to use a different test. Now, my p-value for the distribution of the data was 0.049, so 0.01 below the threshold. Now, that means that I have to use a different statistical test to examine the effects. Now, using the different test has now said that the impact was significant for the cream. Now, if it was a slight distribution of the data, like such a tiny, just like it could be one data point in the whole cohort, one data point, that could mean that I would use a different test, and now the difference in the treatment effect is now not significant. So this puts us in a very interesting position here where it's like, so how do we say whether there's a difference or not when there's such a tiny little difference in the threshold here? So once you do sort of get to go through this process and you can understand how one person's data can be the difference between saying something works and something doesn't work in statistical terms, geez, it makes us be a hell of a lot more critical of study findings.
100%, man. Like I have so many personal examples there where research studies that we conducted in our lab, we report our findings based on the data, but then when I'm zooming in on each individual and how they were kind of distributed within these different groups, I'm kind of forming my own conclusion based on what I'm seeing, because I know these individuals, not necessarily because I'm running a statistical analysis on these two groups. You know what I'm saying? So it's like one really quick example. Oh man, not even, there's so many freaking examples. It's just like, we did a review paper, me and Guillermo, Dr. Guillermo Escalante, we did a review paper on fasted cardio versus fed cardio. And in that paper, we noted that the majority of the studies done, or basically all the studies done between fasted and fed cardio, shows zero difference between the two groups. You know, as long as caloric expenditure is the same, fat loss was the same. We did highlight, though, that those studies were done generally in overweight or obese individuals, never in contesting individuals. And more importantly, Guillermo made a really great point. Even though they weren't statistically significant between groups, a lot of those studies did have a stronger effect size favoring the fasted cardio to a small degree. And then he also noted a lot of those studies are anywhere between 4 and 10 weeks long. So what happens if you do that for 16 weeks or 20 weeks or 24 weeks? By increasing the time, you now increase the power of the effect. So maybe that effect that wasn't statistically significant due to the population, the duration of the study, so on and so forth, maybe it would be statistically significant under different demographic or a different duration, or more importantly, maybe there is some practical significance there. So it's important to kind of evaluate things through a very critical lens. And I don't blame people who don't necessarily have that ability or just trust what an expert is saying, because I was there, and I guess we all were there at some point. And it's just, it makes it pretty frustrating to see some of the brightest minds still share things in a very black and white manner. It makes me question, like, are they doing it just for clickbait? Are they doing it just for engagement purposes, or do they actually lack that critical analysis of things and they are taking things at face value? So it's interesting.
Indeed. Well, guys, I think we definitely covered quite a lot about peak week, and certainly went balls deep there, which is really cool. Chris, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure a lot of people would have benefited from what you had to say today. Thank you, Jackson. Thank you, Samuel. And guys, we'll see you all next time. Chris, where can people find you if they want to follow some of your work?
Absolutely. So check me out at schoolofgains.com. Gains is spelled with a Z. It's a little bit more anabolic. Yep. And you can also just follow me on Instagram. I'm most active on that platform. It's just my full name, at Christopher.Barakat. And that's really all, guys. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And
Cool.
I look forward to hopefully meeting in person sooner than later.
Absolutely, man.
Definitely.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you,
All right.
gentlemen. That was good fun.
That was very cool. Thank you, Chris.
Jackson's time to take another shit. Toilet break.
No, you didn't answer the question. How many a day, Jackson?
At the moment, it'd be like 4.
I remember like towards the end of my prep, I would have been on like there were days where I was like 50, 60 grams of fiber on 1,800 calories, which is obviously a lot. And like water intake is still pretty high. And I wouldn't go for like multiple days at a time. It's like, and then you go to the toilet. I'm like, would try and go to the toilet like daily. I'm just like, I can feel it's there, but there's just not enough food wastage to actually get anything out.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I keep my fiber. I keep my fiber low. Like, the predominance of my carbohydrates.
It's like, what's low when you're on like 5,000 calories?
Well, a big chunk of my carbs is coming from just like rice or cream of rice.
How good is creamed rice though?
Oh, it's life savior for
when I was massing, what year are we in? Like, that used to be creamed rice, cans of creamed rice for like it was like 400 cal or something in like one can. And I remember like drinking them, and I got to a point where I was like, this is gross. I fucking hate this. I was on like, 4,000 something calories, and I'm like drinking creamed rice with protein powder in it, just like hating life. And I'm like, this is like so gross. And then you end up with cans just sitting in the cupboard for months because you need something else. Yeah. Creamed rice is good though.
I'm looking forward to getting back to that true bowl. To be honest with you,
it's like to being at that. It's like you sometimes think back to it. I remember like every morning I used to have, when I was like peak mass, I used to have like a full milk coffee, banana bread, and then I'm like, I didn't even want to eat those things.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I'm doing my cereal post workout. So I do like 150 grams of low fat cereal for like 120-ish grams of carbs. Man, the first few weeks of having that, it's like
this is heaven.
Party after workout. Yeah. And now I'm like, all cereals taste the same. It doesn't matter what I buy; they all taste the same. It's just like sugar in my mouth. It's like you lose like all sensitivity to taste. It's just like
what a time.
Yeah, it's bodybuilding, right? Like, if we talk about bodybuilding at a spectrum from like prep to like peak bulk, there's probably like a 10% little bit in the middle where like eating's comfortable and enjoyable, and then like it doesn't take too long before you're on the other side. No. It's like, oh, this sucks.
I've been in that 10% range for the last like 3 or 4 years, Jackson. It's pretty good.
Yeah, that's because you're Gen Pop, bro.
Brutal.
Hey, I still think I can squat more than you, so be very careful with that.
I don't know. It won't be for long, man. You've seen my squat now.
Well, you're also 30 kilos heavier than me, so relatively, I still think
okay.
You hate when I bring in the body weight. It's all about the absolute loads, huh? All right.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I got to get out of here. We got another call to jump on. Cool, Thank you, lads. We'll speak to you soon.
See you guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Good to chat.
You guys. Likewise. Peace.